Okay, so this is the fourth in a series of 5 lectures, and if you were going to give a title to this one, I don't even know what you would call it. I keep getting struck by the fact that when I try to explain what the 6 guys were that were chained up in a cave, and they were looking at shadows passing on the wall, and that's all they knew of reality, I wanted to say that it was kind of like these guys I see sitting on the porch smoking cigarettes, and they just watch the traffic go by. The front porch is built out kind of close to the road, and they see a lot of traffic going by their house, and they sit there and they smoke cigarettes, and they sit on the porch and they watch the traffic go by. And I was thinking, I hope that, a fire truck or perhaps a cement mixer would go by so that's something interesting to look at. But these guys that were sitting in the cave, finally, one of them gets up and he gets freed. And as soon as he gets freed, he realizes the reality that he perceived, the shadows, they're not diddly squat. They're rudimentary images of the greater reality. And he realizes he never even knew reality. There is so much more to life than what he was perceiving. And he's bombarded with it. And he goes and enjoys it all. He has to even get his eyes squinched. They have to adjust to the sun. But as he's bounding about, running about, and enjoying everything, the full, rich tapestry of life, he realizes that the philosopher is like a prophet. He's like, because the prisoner escaped the cave, and then when he saw everything, how splendid it was, maybe he saw a chariot and a horse, or maybe he saw a rooster, or a clump of grapes. He saw something that he was like, oh my goodness, it's incredible. And he realized after a short period of time that he'd be kind of like, it was his job. He wanted to become a philosopher. He said to himself, I'm going to become a philosopher, and I'm going to try to figure out what this all means. And he was in a good position to figure it out because, like those guys were just sitting there watching traffic go by, and that's all they ever do for their life. And they don't ever do anything else. If they were to win the lottery, then you'd find out. Then they would be like those prisoners that were escaping the cave, Plato's cave, and then they would have to have some life, and they would probably be squinted, and they probably would be having a hard time dealing with it. And maybe that's one of the things that, I thought one of the things was when you talk about the guy sitting on the porch watching the cars go by, it's like you can find happiness in anything. It's, like those guys were just sitting there on the ground and they found happiness in looking at shadows of puppets going across the wall. And as a matter of fact, when the one guy, he thought when he escaped, he came back, he said, I'm like a philosopher, I'm going to show you everybody, I'm going to tell you what's going on out there. They all laughed at him. They didn't even want to know what was going on out there. And I thought that was strange. Why wouldn't you want to know what was going on out there? Why do you think it's better in here? But these guys, they had decided that this thing that they were doing in this cave, it was better. And this guy went out and saw what was really the truth. And when he came back to try to tell him, he was like, no, we prefer whatever. We're sitting right here. We're not doing nothing different. We like it like this. And, that was the thing that you had to get used to, is those guys. And so the one prisoner, he goes back out and he's like trying to, get more jollies. He's trying to have a better, more jollyful time. But it's all you really realize, looking at it as a dog watching the cartoon on PBS. The one prisoner was escaping, he bounded around, and the narrator was saying something about shadows and echoes but over time, those guys, just like those guys watching the cars go by, those guys were watching those shadows go by. They were pretty happy, and they didn't even have any cigarettes, And they started to name everything. They would name them, and they came to understand the shadows in a way that maybe was completely different. Maybe it was a shadow of a rabbit puppet, or it was a vase. To them, it could have been anything. I don't even have a guess. Maybe they thought it was a jackalope and a spacecraft. Maybe, I don't know. But it was like, when Jehovah would have said to Adam, hey, come over here for a second. I'm going to have you name all these animals. And Jehovah made an opossum, and Adam looked at it and said, my God, that's an ugly looking thing. That looks like a half of a rat and half of I don't even know what. But I would call that an opossum. And so they said, okay, good, it's opossum. And then they brought in a wolverine, and he named it a badger. And then when he saw the badger, he said, wait, the badger has to be the wolverine, and the wolverine has to be a badger. That's obvious. And Adam said it was easy to name a porcupine. But just like those guys in the cave, they started to name the things that they saw going by and started, were experiencing them. And just like the guy sitting on the porch, and who's to say the guys who's sitting on the porch smoking their cigarettes, watching traffic go by, maybe they're like the philosophers and they're discovering something. Maybe they're not like the guys in the cave. Or, I think they're the guys in the cave, but maybe they're the philosophers, And philosophy has had a long history of kind of weirdos but cool people who's trying to tell everybody how to live a better life and have their, so there's been some great philosophers down through the history of time like Immanuel Kant, who said, give me liberty or give me death. He was the guy from Boca Raton. And then you had Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche said you never get all the grit out of broccoli. You can do whatever you want to. You could scrub it, you could wash it, you could put it in a jar and shake it up. You're never getting all the grit out of the broccoli. And then there was the famous John Locke, who experienced, influenced the establishment of the United States of America. And John, he said, you always want to have your chocolate wrapped around nuts. That way it's better, healthy for you. John Locke, he said, if you're going to have a milk chocolate or a dark chocolate, make sure you either wrapped around like a Brazil nut or a macadamia. It's going to be good for you that way. And then, of course, there was Socrates, Plato's greatest pupil. And Socrates was most famous for asking, are deer smarter than cows? And Socrates would say, because the deer, they're running around the woods and people are shooting them with rifles. The cows, they're fenced in areas and they're protected. So who's the smarter one? Who's got the cushier job? A lot of cows, they milk. They keep them alive for a long time. The deers are running around. The deer are lucky. But the deer seem so much smarter. And that was that was what Plato was he was pondering. He was saying, the deer seem to be so much smarter than the cows. And Socrates said, and by the way, you ever take a close look at a cow? A cow's a disgusting animal. A cow's the only animal that looks both fat and skinny at the same time. Who ever heard of such a thing? He looks fat, obesely fat, big barrels of fat hanging down off him and the bones sticking out. You see his clavicles and his hip bones and his vertebrae. A cow is a fat and a skinny animal. So I like a deer. Deer's got big, beautiful eyes that look like they should be in a picture. It's some kind of a picture of, a nymph or a gnome. But anyways, so that was what Socrates was all about. Socrates was all about pondering whether deer were smarter than cows, based on what it is that Aristotle, who could really pick the football games. Aristotle could always pick the football games pretty good, and the college football games, forget about it. But in the fourth offering in this series of lectures, as it draws to a conclusion, as we've made our point, we do want to suggest that you tune in for the last final chapter, because not to make too much of a teaser, not to build it up to be too big, but we think we finally figured out an allegory to explain the allegory of the cave. And that's going to be how we close it out in the fifth lecture in this series of 5 lectures.